students. Welcome to our session today. I'm your instructor, CPA AMA Frederick. And in today's class is a continuation of what we started earlier on. So today we'll be dealing with a continuation of learning curve. So in order to look at a question from our past paper, learning curve, remember we had introduced it in our last class. We gave the whole concept of learning curve. So in our class today, I want us to handle this question from our paper, that is May 2016, question number 1. May 2016, question number 1. So we're going to share the paper in our screen so that we go through it together and see what you are expected to have. So this is a question, my good students. Question number 1, this is what you are told that specifically part B, because remember part 1 of the question, we had already looked at part 1 of the question. So part B, we are told that the learning phenomenon applies to time and will affect any cost, which is a function of time. Whenever costs are estimated, the potential impact of learning curve should be considered. So required, you are asked, highlight 4 areas where the learning curve is applied in business. Highlight 4 areas where learning curve is applied in business. So you find that this is a very good concept because we already have the concept of learning curve, and we saw all idea behind learning curve. It was all about us understanding that this is a factor that will tend to affect our labor cost, our time, and all that, right? So looking at the first case, looking at number 1, where we were asked applications of learning curve in business. Application of learning curve in business. Application of learning curve in business. Application of learning curve in business. So you'll find that learning curve can be applied in so many areas whenever we're looking at it in an aspect of business. Because remember, the concept is underestimation, right? And when we're talking of estimation, we know very well that I'm talking of something in future. So we're talking of kind of forecasting. And the whole concept behind learning curve is in regard to what? In regard to labor costs, as we had seen. So one of the application of learning curve, which you can have it very confidently, number 1 application of learning curve, we can talk of budgeting. It can be used in budgeting in regard to, of course, when we are talking of what? Labor cost. Number 2 application of learning curve, you'll find that whenever we are setting our prices, learning curve will also be very ideal. And why are we saying that? It can assist us in pricing decision. This simply because you'll find that the main impact is likely to be in providing better cost predictions to enable price quotations to be prepared for potential orders. So that's why we are seeing as number 2 application of learning curve being pricing decisions. Pricing decisions is going to assist us to come up with these pricing decisions. Just as we've mentioned and say that you find that the main impact of the learning curve is likely to be in providing better cost predictions, which will enable price quotations to be prepared for potential orders. So you'll find that an ability to forecast cost reductions, as at the end of the day, is going to assist us to come up with proper pricing decision. So that is number 2 application of learning curve. We're not going to mention all, because if you have the concept right, you'll find that we'll be having a lot of applications in relation to that. Also, the other point you can talk about the aspect of learning curve. It can also assist management, because you're talking of time, right? It can also assist management or business in work scheduling. Term it as work scheduling. Very important aspect of learning curve. And at this point, we normally say that learning curves enables firms to predict their required inputs more effectively. And this enables them to produce more accurate delivery schedules. This in turn can lead to improved customer relationship and may result in increased future sales. So with the concept of learning curve, we'll find that it can assist us when it comes to work scheduling. We've talked of budgeting, we've talked of pricing decisions, we've talked of work scheduling, and so many advantages, my good students, that you can list. But remember, these are just a few. Applications that you can note. So this was application of learning curve. That is part one of that question note. You were asked to give application of learning curve. Part two of the question note, what we asked. Part two of the question, this is what you are told, that describe 4 limitations of using learning curve in business. Limitations of using learning curve in business. Limitation of using learning curve in business. That is another question that you are asked. Describe 4 limitations of using the learning curve in business. Again, whenever I've seen such a question, I should just smile. Whenever I've seen such a question, we should just smile. The reason being, you have the concept right. And in this case, you'll find that we'll be having a lot of limitations. Again, we are just going to mention a few. So number 2, you are asked here to give limitations of learning curve in business. Limitations of learning curve. Limitations of learning curve. Limitation of learning curve. Limitation of learning curve in business, or limitation of learning curve theory. So, looking at the limitations of learning curve theory, my good students, what should come at the back of your mind first? You will find that, first of all, whenever we're talking of learning curve, at times it's not always kind of, you normally tend to assume that I'll be having a very conducive work environment which will enable us to learn, which in reality you'll find that it's not the case. Why? Maybe you'll be employed somewhere, or maybe you're employed somewhere. In that case, you'll find that probably your manager, they normally term it as bad blood. Damu yako na yeye haijapatana. So you'll find that as a result of such, meaning that is kind of, you won't be in that good relationship. Or maybe you have that person in the office who is supposed to train you to catch up with what the company normally probably do in relation to the area that you've been employed. But you find that in reality, some people, they just have other characters. In that this person will not be willing to assist you to learn and catch up things early enough and also very fast. So you'll find that as such case, learning curve will assume that I'll be having a conducive work environment, of which in this case, it is not reality. So as such, you'll also find that is amongst main limitations of learning curve. So looking at the limitations of learning curve, number 1, we'll be talking of what we've mentioned. We've talked of, it assumes stable conditions at work. It assumes stable conditions at work, which will enable learning to take place. Assumes stable conditions at work, which will enable learning to take place, which is not the case. Assumes stable conditions, assumes stable conditions at work, assumes stable conditions at work, which will enable learning to take place, which will enable learning to take place, which will enable learning to take place, which will enable learning to take place. Which in reality, my good students, will find that it's not always the case. It's not always the case. This is a limitation. That is number 1 limitation. Number 2 limitation of learning curve, as you can, we normally tend to look at it that this is a form of curve. This is a form of a kind of rate that I need to establish. So you'll find that at times it might be very difficult for us to obtain this curve that you're going to use to say that this person is learning at a particular rate or at a given rate. So you'll find that also another limitation that you can also note very comfortably here is we normally say that it might be difficult to obtain accurate data. It might be difficult to obtain accurate data to decide what the learning curve is. Simply because we are all humans. So you'll find that at times we might tend to be very unpredictable. And as such, maybe if I anticipated that this person will learn very fast, on the other case, probably it turns out the other way around. So you'll find that at times obtaining this data to enable us to establish a proper learning curve at times is always an issue. So that's why we are saying that it might be difficult to obtain accurate data to decide what the learning curve or the learning curve is, So also another case, we normally tend to say that the concept of learning curve, it normally works in this way, that the more experienced I am, the lesser time I'm going to take in performing a task. Meaning that, assuming you're employed as a new person and you are being paid on an hourly rate, so that in such an event, maybe while working, you are not working for longer hours because you are very new in performing that task. So that in this event, assuming that maybe you are very new in performing a task, maybe you're taking say like 5 hours, and each hour maybe you're being paid say like 1,000 shillings. So as at the end of the day, you go home with how much? 5,000. Now you are very experienced in performing the same task. You find that maybe you can take 3 hours or 2 hours. The same value. This should give us 3,000. In reality, will that really work? Will that really work? You'll find that, in fact, I should be paid more because I'm experienced. I should be paid more because I have skills. So you'll find that in this event, it might tend to bring form of that resistance amongst the workers in regard to reduction of their pay. So that's why you normally say that workers might not agree to a gradual reduction in production time per unit. Workers might not agree to a gradual reduction in production time per unit. So basically in that case, you find that you've looked at the application and also you've looked at limitations of learning curve, which I did. They are very important to enable us to understand this concept clearly, Now, talk of our question here. So you've done that part. Now talk of our question. This is what you are asked. Part C of the question. We are told that Spacecom Limited is about to bid on a new radar system. Although the product uses new technology, Spacecom Limited believes that a learning rate of 75% is appropriate. The first unit is expected to consume 700 hours, and the contract is for 40 units. So the question here, we are asked the total amount of hours required to build the 40 units. So that's the question that I'm asked, my good student. That's the question that I'm asked. Total hours required to build the 40 units. So the moment you're there, that is a point where I should recall the aspect of learning curve concept. That's the point where I should recall the concept of learning curve. So number 3, or rather part C of that question, number 1 of that, you are asked to determine the total cost of pay for how many units? Cost of 40 units, right? Sharing this question. That is the total amount of hours required to build the 40 units. So total hours. So I'm having total hours to build 40 units. That is what the examiner wants us to determine. The total hours to build 40 units. So at this point, straight away, I should recall the concept of learning curve. And remember, for learning curve, we mentioned that for us to determine our total cost or time, I should always be talking of A times X raised to power B plus 1. This is the formula or the function of determining our total cost or time under learning curve. Where Y, this should give us our total time or cost. A, I should be having my A here. A should give us the total time or cost of producing the first unit. So it's upon us to identify in our question, were we given this cost or time? Were we given the cost of time? This is what we are given. Look at here. So I'm told the first unit is expected to consume 700 hours and the contract is for 40 units. So I'm given the first unit is expected to take 700 hours. So here I can confidently come and write 700. The time or cost of producing the first unit. In this case, X, I want to talk of 40 units. B, recall, B we mentioned this is a learning index. And to determine the learning index, my good students, if you can recall, we talked of what? Log R, we divide by log 2. That should give us our learning index. And in this case of ours, the examiner was very good. He gave us a learning rate of what percentage? The examiner here had given us a learning rate of, we are given a learning rate of 75%, right? We are given a learning rate of 75%. So that will be easy for us because I know very well I should be talking of rate, log R, which is rate. And this 75%, maybe a person will be asking, Mwalimu, where are you getting this? Believes that a learning rate of 75% is appropriate. So I'm having 75%. So we should be talking of log 0.75. We divide by log 2 to give us our learning rate, to give us our B, to give us our B. So therefore, we should be talking of the value that I'm going to have here, that should be our B. And our B, confidently, we can talk of log 0.75. We divide by log 2 to give me a figure of negative 0.4150. So that is our learning index. That is our learning index being our B. So the moment I do have that case, I know very well that now determining our total time, which is why I'm going to talk of 700. We multiply by X, which is 40. We raise to B, which in this case we determine to be negative 0.4150 plus 1. So that should give us how much, my good student? We should be talking of negative 0.4150 plus 1. 40 raised to power answer. 700 times answer. So I should be talking of 6058 hours. So in this case, we should be talking of 6,058 hours. This is the total time that I'm going to require for us to produce the 40 units. For us to produce 40 units, I should require 6,058 hours. And that is how we can work out learning curve, total time. So that was the first question that the examiner wanted us to handle. Second part of the question, what are we told now? The average time to build each of the 40 units. The average time to build each of the 40 units. The average time. So, part 2 here, the examiner wants us to determine the average time. The average time to build 40 units. And you know very well that at any given point, whenever I'm dealing with the concept of learning curve, actually in this case, we could have worked it out in 2 ways. We know very well for us, whenever I'm dealing with the concept of learning curve, to determine our average time, we'll be talking of A, X raised to power B. Where in this case, Y is our average time. We have our A to be 700. We times 40. In this case, I'm looking at our B, learning index, which in this case we determine to be negative 0.4150. So that should give us how much, my good student? I should be having 40 raised for negative 0.4150, of course, by 700. So that should give us 151.44. So therefore, my average time, I should be talking of 151.44. That should be our average time. Alternatively, we can have it in this case. We can take our average time to be, in this case, in the way that maybe I'm not using our average, I'm not using learning curve concept. We should be talking of our total time, right? We divide by the number of units produced. Where we'll be talking of 6058, we divide by 40. That should give us how much, my good students? 6058 divided by 40. That should give us the same case, 151. So in this case, we're talking of a 151.45. Same concept. But I wanted us to use the learning curve at least to enable us to do what? To understand the concept. What about part 3 of the question? What are we asked? I want you guys to see how learning curve is simple. I want you guys to understand how learning curve is so sweet, so simple, right? So long as you have the concept right. So let us share that question. See, part 3 of the question, the examiner wanted us to determine what. Part 3 of the question you asked, assuming that a worker works 80 hours per year. Determine the number of workers that should be assigned this contract to complete it in a year. So we need to determine the number of workers to be assigned the contract. So number of workers to be assigned the contract. Number of workers, my good student here, to be assigned the contract. Number of workers to be assigned the contract. How will you determine the number of workers to be assigned the contract? Because I'm told that each worker works for how many years? How many hours? Each worker, we are given that each worker works for, that should be 2,000 and I'm given each worker works for 2,080 hours. Each worker works for 2,080 hours. 2,080 hours. This is each worker. If each worker is working for 2,080 hours, and you know very well that the company require total hours of 6058 to complete that task. So in this case, I'll require how many workers? That is what the examiner wants us to determine, right? So in that case, you'll find that number of workers here, we should be talking of 6058 we divide by 28. So that should give us how many workers? 6058 we divide by 2080 to give me a figure of 2.9, but you know very well we can't have a half person. So therefore, in this case, we can talk of what? 3 workers. So basically, you find that is what the examiner wanted us to do in that question. And that's how concepts of learning curve are. They are always as simple as that. So to this juncture, my good student, thank you so much, and I want you to join me in the next session whereby we are going to handle these other questions, because the question that we are supposed to handle is May 2016, which we've done it here. There is this other question, May 2017, a very good question. Then we'll be looking at November 2018, question number 5. So in our next class, I want us to handle this question, November 2018, question number 5. Thank you so much, and let us meet in the next session.